In a modest Chicago neighborhood, an 8-year-old girl dreams of seeing her mother smile with pride. One morning, they help an elderly lady on the bus, and the gesture changes the course of their lives. The elderly lady's son was a millionaire, and touched by their kindness, he intervenes to help the girl's mother get a job. If this beautiful story of perseverance and love has caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. To continue, the alarm clock didn't ring. It didn't have to. Helen had been awake for over an hour, staring at the peeling ceiling of the room she shared with her daughter Isabel. The sunken mattress protested with every movement, but she remained still, mentally rehearsing the words she would say at the interview that morning. Her hands sweated when she thought about the questions they might ask, the crumpled resume she carried in her plastic bag, the ink stains that wouldn't completely come off her nails no matter how much she scrubbed. On the opposite side of the narrow bed, Isabel breathed softly, her curly hair spread across the pillow that had long lost its original shape. At 8 years old, the girl had the peaceful sleep of someone who still believed the world could be kind, despite all evidence to the contrary. Helen watched her with a mixture of tenderness and worry. Isabel had matured too quickly, learned early not to ask for what they couldn't have, to smile when the refrigerator was almost empty, to do her homework by candlelight when there was no money for the electricity bill. When the first ray of sun began to filter through the cheap fabric curtain, Helen finally got up. Her bare feet touched the cold floor of the 2-room apartment in the Hope Creek neighborhood of Chicago. The neighborhood's name had always seemed like a cruel irony of fate, but that morning, for the first time in months, Helen felt that perhaps hope wasn't just a name on a rusty sign. The opportunity had come through Mrs. Carmen, a neighbor from the floor below, who knew someone at Corporate Horizon. A position for a cleaning assistant, but in a commercial building downtown with a formal contract, commuter benefits, and the promise of a salary that could change everything. Helen repeated the numbers in her mind like a prayer. $1,200 plus benefits. It was almost double what she managed to make from sporadic cleaning jobs in private homes. She moved through the small kitchen carefully so as not to wake Isabel. The old coffee maker made a characteristic noise, but the girl was used to sleeping through all the morning sounds. Helen prepared a weak coffee, saving on the grounds, and ate a slice of bread with margarine while standing leaning against the sink. She had no time to sit, no time to savor. Every minute was precious when you were always living trying to catch up. The outfit chosen for the occasion was hanging on the makeshift clothesline in the service area. A white blouse that she had ironed 3 times the night before, a pair of black pants that hid the frayed parts well, and the synthetic leather shoes that were her only formal footwear. Helen dressed with the care of someone preparing for battle. Each piece was armor against the judgment of others, against the contemptuous looks she sometimes received for being who she was, for doing what she did. As she tied her hair into a simple bun, she heard a movement from the bedroom. Isabel had woken up, as always happened when her mother was getting ready to leave. The girl had a 6th sense for when something important was happening, an intuition that Helen sometimes envied. Isabel, still in her pajamas, that faded cotton set that had been a Christmas gift 2 years ago, appeared at the kitchen door, rubbing her eyes. Her hair was even more rebellious after sleep, forming a curly halo around her small face. Her brown eyes, just like Helen's, shone with an intelligence that always surprised adults. "Mom, is today the interview day, isn't it?" Isabel asked, her voice still hoarse from sleep. Helen stopped fiddling with her bag and looked at her daughter. How could she explain to an 8-year-old child the weight of that moment? How could she say that this interview wasn't just another job opportunity, but perhaps the last chance to change their lives before the overdue bills piled up to the point of losing the apartment? "It is, my love. Mom is going to talk to some people about a job." Isabel came closer and hugged her mother's waist, resting her face on Helen's stomach. It was a tight hug, the kind children give when they sense that adults need strength, even if they can't explain exactly why. "They're going to like you a lot, Mom. You're the hardest working person I know." Helen felt a lump in her throat. How did Isabel always manage to say exactly what she needed to hear? The girl had this unique ability to see the best in people, even when they themselves couldn't see themselves with kindness. "Do you want to come with me, Helen?" asked, although she already knew the answer. Isabel never let her face difficult moments alone, Of course, we're a team, remember? Helen smiled for the first time that morning. A team. Yes. They had been a team ever since Isabel's father had left 4 years ago, leaving only a note on the kitchen table and a pile of debts. Since then, mother and daughter had learned to support each other, creating a bond that went far beyond family ties. While Isabel got ready, Helen reviewed the documents one more time. ID card, social security information, proof of residence, 2 references from previous employers who had been willing to give a good recommendation. The resume, typed on a borrowed typewriter, listed years of experience in cleaning and organizing. It wasn't much, Helen knew, but it was honest. Every job there represented dignity, sweat, and the determination to never give up. The kitchen clock read 5:40 in the morning when the two left the apartment. The building's hallway was silent. Only the distant murmur of a television on in some apartment broke the silence. The concrete staircase echoed their steps as they descended the 3 floors to the street. Outside, the air was cold and damp, typical of a Chicago winter. Helen pulled her blouse tighter, trying to shield herself from the wind that cut between the neighborhood's buildings. Isabel, in her blue wool coat that was getting too small, held her mother's hand tightly, walking at the same hurried pace. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. Along the way they passed by Mr. John's bakery, which was already open and exuded the comforting smell of warm bread, by the pharmacy that only opened at 7, by the school where Isabel studied, which was still shrouded in morning darkness. Each known point on that route brought memories, some good, others not so much, but all part of the tapestry of their lives. At the stop there were already a few people waiting, workers like Helen, who woke up before dawn to face long journeys to their jobs, maids, construction workers, salespeople, security guards, people who kept the city running while others still slept. There was a silent solidarity among them, a mutual recognition of the daily struggle they shared. The bus arrived 10 minutes late, as always. It was an old vehicle with cracked vinyl seats and windows that didn't close properly. Helen paid for both fares with counted money and managed to find 2 seats side by side in the middle of the bus. Isabel settled by the window, watching the city that was still waking up outside. As the bus swayed through the potholed streets, Helen closed her eyes and tried to calm her nerves. The interview was scheduled for 8 in the morning on the 40th floor of a commercial building on Michigan Avenue. She had researched Corporate Horizon on the internet at Isabel's school and found out it was a business consulting firm. She didn't understand exactly what they did, but she knew it was an important place with important people, and that made her even more nervous. "Mom, are you okay?" Isabel asked, noticing the tension on Helen's face. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just thinking about what I'm going to say to the people there. Tell the truth like you always teach me. The truth is that you work very hard and take very good care of me. They'll see that." Helen opened her eyes and looked at her daughter. Isabel was right, as she almost always was. Honesty was the only luxury they could afford, the only thing they had in abundance. If it wasn't enough, at least Helen could look at herself in the mirror at the end of the day, knowing she had given her best. The bus stopped abruptly at a stop near downtown. It was a busy stop, with many people getting on and off. Helen saw through the window that a drizzle had started, that fine, persistent rain that turned Chicago into an even grayer city. People on the sidewalk walked faster, protecting themselves with newspapers, bags, anything that could serve as a makeshift umbrella. Among the people who got on the bus, Helen noticed a white-haired lady, who must have been about 70. She leaned on a cane and carried a brown leather bag, already quite worn by time. The woman looked for an empty seat, but the bus was packed. She remained standing, holding on as best she could to the handrail, swaying with every brake or turn. Helen noticed that some younger passengers were seated and could offer their seat to the lady, but everyone seemed too busy with their phones or pretended not to see her. It was like that in the big city, everyone just looking out for themselves, as if kindness were a luxury few could afford. Isabel had also noticed the situation. The girl gently nudged Helen and whispered, "Mom, why is no one giving the lady a seat?" "Because people are in a hurry, my love. Everyone has their own problems." "But she looks tired." "Yes, she does. They continued to watch the lady, who was struggling to keep her balance. With every sudden movement of the bus, she clung tighter to the handrail, and Helen could see that her hands were trembling, whether from fatigue, the cold, or perhaps fear of falling. Then it happened. The driver, probably annoyed with the traffic or the delay, braked abruptly as he approached a traffic light. The impact was strong enough to make all the passengers sway violently. The elderly lady, who didn't have enough strength to hold on properly, was thrown forward and fell heavily onto the bus floor. The sound was frightening. The cane flew to one side, the bag opened, and some coins scattered on the floor. The lady lay there, moaning softly, clearly hurt and disoriented. For a few seconds the bus fell silent, everyone looking at the scene but no one moving. Helen felt her heart race, not because of the situation itself, but because of the reaction of the other passengers. Some looked on with curiosity, others with annoyance, as if the lady's fall were a personal inconvenience. One or two even complained about the delay this might cause. The driver, a middle-aged man with a prominent belly, looked in the rearview mirror and shouted, "Ma'am, are you all right? Because I'm on a schedule and I can't just sit here." The elderly woman tried to get up, but she was visibly shaken. She could only prop herself up on an elbow, breathing with difficulty. Helen saw that she had scraped her arm in the fall and that a small spot of blood was beginning to appear on her beige blouse. I think I hurt something," the lady said in a weak voice. The driver sighed loudly, as if it were her fault. "Look, I'm going to have to ask you to get off. I can't have an injured passenger on the bus. It's a liability. There's a clinic right there on the corner." Helen couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man was literally asking an injured old woman who had been hurt because of his own careless driving to get off the bus in the rain to fend for herself. But how is she going to walk there? One of the few voices that rose in protest came from a woman sitting in the back. "Not my problem. I have to think about all the passengers here." Helen looked at Isabel and saw that the girl's eyes were welling up, clearly disturbed by the situation. The 8-year-old seemed to understand better than any adult on that bus that something was very wrong with that scene. It was Isabel who broke the silence, speaking in a low but clear voice, enough for Helen to hear. "Mum, we have to help her." Helen felt a tightness in her chest. They were late, the interview was in less than an hour, and getting off the bus at that point meant having to take at least 2 more to reach their destination. It meant arriving late, perhaps completely losing the opportunity that could change their lives. But when she looked again at the lady lying on the bus floor, trembling in pain and being treated like a nuisance by the other passengers, Helen knew she had no choice. It was no longer about the interview or her needs. It was about doing what was right, regardless of the consequences. "Come on, Isabel. Let's help her." Mother and daughter got up from their seats and approached the lady. Helen knelt beside her while Isabel stood watching attentively. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Helen asked gently. The elderly woman looked up, and Helen could see that her eyes were moist, not just from pain, but from humiliation. How many times had this woman been treated as invisible, as a problem to be quickly resolved? "I think so. My arm hurts a lot, and my leg, I can't get up properly." Helen looked around. None of the other passengers offered help. On the contrary, some seemed irritated by the delay. The driver was tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, clearly impatient. "Listen," Helen said, addressing the driver. "This lady needs medical attention. You can't just leave her on the street like this. I already told you it's not my responsibility. You want to help? Help her outside. I can't have any trouble here." The cruelty of those words hit Helen like a punch. Responsibility. As if taking care of each other wasn't everyone's responsibility. As if humanity were a luxury that some could afford and others couldn't. It was then that Isabel crouched down beside her mother and, with a delicacy that surprised even Helen, held the lady's free hand. "My name is Isabel. What's your name?" The elderly woman looked at the girl, surprised by the unexpected kindness. "I'm Rose. Rose Mary." "Mrs. Rose, we're going to take care of you, okay? My mom and I will get off with you and we'll find a place for you to get looked after." Helen felt her eyes fill with tears. Her 8-year-old daughter was giving a lesson in humanity to an entire bus of adults. And at that moment, Helen knew she had made the right decision. even if it cost her the interview opportunity. "Come on, Mrs. Rose, let's get out of here." Helen and Isabel helped the lady to her feet slowly. They gathered her things, the cane, the coins that had scattered. Other passengers watched, but none offered help. When they finally reached the bus door, the driver didn't even wait for them to get off completely before accelerating, making them almost stumble onto the sidewalk. And there they were, the three of them, on the street, under the fine drizzle that was now turning into real rain. Rose leaned heavily on her cane, Helen held her bag and the ladies, and Isabel stayed by Mrs. Rose's side, like a little guardian. Helen looked at her watch. 7:15 in the morning. The interview was at 8, and they were at least 40 minutes away from the location. Even if they managed to get a taxi at that moment, they would be late. The opportunity she had dreamed of, the job that could solve so many problems, was slipping through her fingers like the rain that now soaked her hair. But when she saw Isabel taking off her own coat to put over Mrs. Rose's shoulders, Helen knew that there was something more important at stake than any job interview. She was teaching her daughter that there are times when stopping to help someone is more important than any rush, any commitment, any personal dream. The rain continued to fall, people hurried past on the sidewalk, and Helen hugged the two most important women in her life at that moment, a daughter who taught her about kindness, and a stranger who gave her the opportunity to be better than her circumstances. The rain thickened with each minute, turning the morning drizzle into a storm that seemed to want to test the determination of the three women standing on the sidewalk. Helen looked around, searching for some shelter where they could protect themselves while they decided what to do with Mrs. Rose. The elderly woman was shivering, not just from the cold, but from pain. Her injured arm was starting to swell, and she was leaning more and more heavily on her cane. Isabel, with her blue coat now covering Mrs. Rose's fragile shoulders, remained by the lady's side like a little nurse. The girl had learned about first aid in school, and although she knew she shouldn't move someone who was badly hurt, she realized that staying there in the rain was not an option. "Mrs. Rose, can you walk a little?" Helen asked, looking at an awning of a closed shop a few meters away. "I think so, dear, but slowly." The three of them moved slowly towards the makeshift shelter. Each of Mrs. Rose's steps was careful, painful. Helen could hear the small groans the lady tried to suppress, a display of dignity that deeply moved her. When they finally reached the awning, they all sighed in relief, escaping the rain that was now falling heavily. Helen took her cell phone out of her pocket. It was an old basic model, but it served its purpose. She dialed 911 while Isabel kept a conversation going with Mrs. Rose to keep her awake and distracted. "Where are you from, Mrs. Rose?" Isabel asked with genuine curiosity. "I live nearby in the Chinatown neighborhood. I was on my way to visit my sister at Mercy Hospital. She had surgery and—" Mrs. Rose's voice faltered a little, and Helen realized the situation was even more delicate than she had imagined. The lady wasn't just out for a morning stroll. She was on her way to care for someone who also needed her. 911, what's your emergency?" a voice answered on the other end of the line. "Hello? I'm here at State and Adams, and there's an elderly lady who fell on the bus and got hurt. She's in pain in her arm and leg and she can't move properly." "Understood. What is the patient's approximate age?" Helen looked at Mrs. Rose. "About 70. Is she conscious and oriented?" "Yes, she is. But she's in a lot of pain and shivering." "Okay. I'm sending an ambulance to your location. It may take about 20 minutes due to traffic and the rain. Keep the patient warm and conscious. Don't give her anything to eat or drink." Helen hung up the phone and turned to the other two. Mrs. Rose was sitting on a low wall in front of the shop, with Isabel by her side holding her free hand. The scene touched Helen in a way she couldn't fully explain. Her daughter, who had so often needed to be strong beyond her years, was now offering that strength to a stranger. "The ambulance will be here in about 20 minutes, Helen informed them. "We'll stay here with you until then." Mrs. Rose looked up at Helen with moist eyes. "You don't have to do this. You've already lost so much time with me. That little girl said you had an important appointment." Helen knelt in front of Mrs. Rose at eye level. "The appointment can wait. You can't be left alone like this." But Isabel, always observant, noticed the sadness her mother was trying to hide. The girl knew how much that interview meant to them, how many nights Helen had stayed awake planning what she would say, how she would present herself, what she would wear. She knew money was tight and that this opportunity might be their only one. "Mum," Isabel said quietly, pulling Helen aside, "you can't give up the interview because of me." "It's not because of you, my love. It's because it's the right thing to do. But we can call the company and explain what happened. People will understand." Helen smiled at her daughter's naivety. In truth, she didn't have much hope that a company like Corporate Horizon would be understanding of a candidate who arrived late, regardless of the reason. But it was worth a try. She took a crumpled piece of paper with the company's phone number from her pocket and dialed. An efficient and impersonal-sounding secretary answered. "Corporate Horizon, good morning." "Good morning. My name is Helen Scott. I have an interview scheduled for 8 o'clock this morning with the Human Resources Department. One moment, please." Helen waited, listening to bad instrumental music while she watched Isabel talking to Mrs. Rose about school, about her favorite cartoons, about anything that could keep the lady distracted from the pain. "Mrs. Scott, the person responsible for the interviews hasn't arrived yet due to the traffic caused by the rain. Your interview has been postponed to 9:30. Can you be here at that time?" Helen looked at Mrs. Rose, at Isabel, at the rain that continued to fall. It was 8:15 in the morning. If the ambulance arrived in 20 minutes, and if everything went well at the hospital, maybe there would still be time. "Yes, I can." "Thank you so much." When she hung up, Isabel clapped her hands discreetly. Mrs. Rose also smiled, despite the pain. "See, Mom, I told you everything would be all right." In the minutes that followed, the three women formed an unexpected bond. Mrs. Rose shared that she had been a widow for 5 years, that she had been a primary school teacher for 40 years, and that her only family was a younger sister and 2 nephews who lived in another state. Helen talked about Isabel, about the challenges of raising a daughter alone, about her dreams of a more stable life. Isabel, in turn, charmed Mrs. Rose with stories from school, with drawings she made in her notebook, with her unique ability to find beauty in the simplest things. The girl had a natural talent for making people feel special, heard, important. When the ambulance finally arrived, Helen felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The paramedics, 2 young and professional men, quickly disembarked and approached the group. "Are you the lady who was injured?" one of them asked, addressing Helen. "It's her," Helen said, pointing to Mrs. Rose. "She fell on the bus when the driver braked suddenly. She's in pain in her arm and leg." The paramedic knelt before Mrs. Rose and began a quick but careful examination. He asked questions about the pain, tested her reflexes, checked her blood pressure. His colleague prepared the portable stretcher. "Mrs. Rose, we're going to take you to the hospital for some tests, okay? It doesn't seem to be anything serious, but it's better to be sure." As the professionals prepared Mrs. Rose for transport, Helen noticed that a small group of people had formed around them. Some watched with curiosity, others with genuine concern. A lady who worked in a nearby shop had brought a clean towel for Mrs. Rose to dry herself. It was then that Helen noticed a man who was different from the rest. He stood a little apart, talking on the phone, but his eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding under the awning. He wore an expensive dark suit, carried a genuine leather briefcase, and had the air of someone accustomed to solving important problems. There was something familiar about his face, but Helen couldn't place it. The man finished his call and approached the group. "Excuse me," he said politely, addressing Helen. "I saw what happened here, and I'd like to know if I can help in any way." Helen was surprised. It wasn't common for well-dressed people to get involved in situations like that on the street. "Thank you very much, sir, but everything is under control. The ambulance has arrived and will take the lady to the hospital." The man nodded but didn't move away. He continued to watch as the paramedics settled Mrs. Rose on the stretcher. It was then that something unexpected happened. Mrs. Rose, now more stable and relieved to be receiving medical care, looked in the man's direction, and her face transformed into an expression of surprise and joy. "Robert? Robert, is that you?" The man froze as if he'd been shocked. He quickly approached the stretcher, and Helen could see that his eyes had also filled with tears. Mom, what happened to you?" Helen and Isabel exchanged astonished glances. This elegant man, who looked like he had stepped out of the pages of a business magazine, was Mrs. Rose's son. And they had spent the last half hour taking care of his mother without knowing who he was. Robert held Mrs. Rose's hand, his voice choked with emotion. "I was on my way back from a meeting when I saw the commotion here on the street. I never imagined that." Rose Mary smiled weakly at her son. "I was on my way to the hospital to see Aunt Carmen. I fell on the bus, and these two wonderful people helped me. Robert, this is Helen and this is Isabel." Robert turned to Helen and Isabel, and for the first time in many years, Helen saw a successful man genuinely moved, genuinely grateful. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice still trembling. "You and your daughter. You took care of my mother when no one else cared." "Anyone would have done the same," Helen replied, although she knew that wasn't true. "No," Robert said firmly, "anyone would not have. I saw that bus leave. I saw you get off in the rain to help a stranger. That's not common, Mrs. Scott. That is exceptional." The paramedics interrupted the moment, announcing that they needed to leave for the hospital. Robert asked to accompany his mother in the ambulance, but first he turned once more to Helen and Isabel. "Please accept this," he said, taking out his wallet and offering some bills. "It's the least I can do to thank you." Helen recoiled as if the money would burn her hands. "No, Mr. Robert, we didn't help your mother for money. We helped because it was the right thing to do." Robert's reaction was immediate. He put the money away, but his eyes shone with an admiration that Helen rarely saw directed at someone like her. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's very hard to find people like you these days." Isabel, who had watched the entire scene in silence, finally spoke. "Mr. Robert, take good care of Mrs. Rose, okay? She's very sweet." Robert knelt to be at Isabel's eye level. "I will, you can be sure of that, and I hope that one day I can repay your kindness." The ambulance departed, taking Mrs. Rose and Robert. Helen stood under the awning, wet, late, but with a strange feeling in her chest. She couldn't get the look of gratitude from that man out of her head, the way he had looked at them as if they were heroes in a movie. "Mum, are we going to your interview?" Isabel asked, bringing Helen back to reality. Helen looked at her watch. 9 o'clock in the morning. They had half an hour to get to Michigan Avenue. With luck and cooperative traffic, there was still time. "Let's go, my daughter. Let's see if we can still change our lives today." They took the first bus that passed, this time managing to get seats. During the ride, Helen couldn't stop thinking about the morning they had experienced. In just a few hours, she had lost an opportunity, gained another chance, met a lovely lady, and discovered that kindness could still surprise people. Isabel rested her head on her mother's shoulder and whispered, "Mum, you did the right thing. I'm proud of you." Helen kissed the top of her daughter's head. It didn't matter what happened in the interview. She had already won the most important prize of the day, knowing that she was raising a daughter with her heart in the right place. The bus continued towards the city center, carrying two women who didn't know that their lives were about to change in ways they could never have imagined. Behind them, in an ambulance heading to the hospital, a successful businessman looked at his injured mother and thought of two strangers who had taught him a lesson about what really matters in life. The rain was gradually subsiding, and through the fogged-up bus windows, Helen could see the sun trying to peek through the clouds. Maybe it was a good omen. Maybe, just maybe, this day that had started so badly could have a happy ending. When the bus finally stopped on Michigan Avenue, Helen and Isabel got off and looked up at the skyscrapers that rose like mountains of glass and concrete. Somewhere up there on the 40th floor of one of those buildings was the opportunity Helen had dreamed of for months. But now, walking hand in hand with Isabel on the bustling sidewalk of Chicago's most important avenue, Helen felt that she had already achieved something much more valuable than any job. She had gained the certainty that no matter what the future held, she and Isabel would face everything together, always doing the right thing, always taking care of each other and anyone who needed help. The corporate Horizon building rose before them, imposing and intimidating. Helen took a deep breath, straightened her blouse wrinkled by the rain, and walked towards the main entrance. It was time to find out if kindness and honesty still had a place in the business world. The lobby of the corporate Horizon building was exactly as Helen had imagined, immense, with marble floors that reflected the lights from the high ceiling. and a decor that screamed success and money. Well-dressed people moved with haste, carrying leather briefcases and talking on cell phones with the urgency of those who move millions every day. Helen felt small in that environment. Her white blouse, still slightly damp from the rain, contrasted with the impeccable suits around her. Isabel held her hand tightly, her eyes wide at so much grandeur. The girl had never been in a place like this, where even the air seemed more expensive. At the reception desk, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a professional smile greeted them. "Good morning, how can I help you?" "Good morning, I'm Helen Scott. I have an interview scheduled with the Human Resources Department at 9:30. The receptionist consulted her computer, typing quickly with long red nails. "Yes, here it is. You've arrived at the perfect time. 38th floor, room 3820. The elevator is to your right." "Thank you very much." While they waited for the elevator, Helen tried to calm her nerves. She checked once more that her documents were organized in the plastic folder, that her hair was neat, that there were no visible stains on her clothes. Isabel sensed her mother's anxiety and squeezed her hand. "Mom, take a deep breath. You're going to do great." The elevator arrived, silent and mirrored. During the ascent, Helen saw herself reflected on the metal walls, and for a moment almost didn't recognize herself. She seemed smaller, more fragile than she really was. But when she looked at Isabel by her side, she saw strength in her daughter's brown eyes, and that reassured her. The 38th floor was a labyrinth of hallways with beige carpeting and glass walls that revealed meeting rooms where executives gestured around enormous tables. Helen followed the signs until she found room 3820, where a discreet plaque read Human Resources. A middle-aged woman with grey hair, tied in a severe bun, received them at the door. She wore a navy blue suit and black-rimmed glasses that made her look even more serious than she probably was. "Mrs. Helen Scott?" "That's me. I'm Marcia Fernandez, Human Resources Coordinator, and this must be your daughter." "Yes, this is Isabel. I hope it's not a problem that she came with me." Marcia looked at Isabel with an expression that Helen couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't disapproval, but it wasn't exactly approval either. "No problem. She can wait in the waiting room over there. We have some magazines and water." Isabel went to the indicated room after kissing Helen's forehead and whispering, "Good luck, Mom. I'll be here rooting for you." Helen followed Marcia into a small but well-organized room with a meeting table, a few chairs, and a window that offered a partial view of the city. Chicago stretched out below, an infinite metropolis of dreams and disappointments. "Please, have a seat," Marcia said, settling on the other side of the table. "Did you bring your documents?" Helen opened her bag and carefully removed the papers organized in a transparent folder. ID card, social security information, proof of residence, work permits, and 2 letters of recommendation she had gotten from former employers. Marcia examined each document with meticulous attention, making notes on a clipboard. Helen watched the woman's every expression, trying to interpret whether it was a good sign or not. "I see here that you have a lot of experience in residential cleaning, but little experience in a corporate environment. Why would you like to work for a company like ours?" Helen had rehearsed this answer several times, but now, sitting in that intimidating room, the words seemed to escape her mind. "Well, Mrs. Fernandez, I've always believed that cleaning is much more than just dusting furniture. It's about creating an environment where people feel good to work, where they can be productive and happy. I know that in a company like this, where so many important decisions are made, it's essential that the environment is always perfect." Marcia nodded, making more notes. "And why are you leaving your current job?" "Actually, I clean houses for families, but it's not a steady job. Each week it's a different house, and I never know if I'll have work the next month. I need something more stable, especially because of my daughter." "I understand. And how do you handle pressure? This is a very dynamic environment, with tight deadlines and stressed people." Helen thought about the morning she had lived through, the pressure of waking up before dawn, the anxiety of the interview, the difficult decision to help Mrs. Rose even knowing she could lose the opportunity. "I think pressure is a part of life, especially when you have responsibilities. I've learned not to let the stress of others affect me negatively. I do my job to the best of my ability, regardless of what's happening around me." The interview continued for another 15 minutes. Marcia asked questions about hours, availability, experience with specific cleaning products, ability to work in a team. Helen answered with honesty, without trying to seem like more than she was, but also without diminishing herself. It was then that Marcia asked a question Helen hadn't anticipated. "You arrived a little late today. Was there a problem?" Helen hesitated for a moment. She could make up an excuse about the traffic or the rain, which were partially true. But she looked out the window, thought of Isabel in the next room, of Mrs. Rose in the hospital, and decided that the truth was always the best option. "Actually, Mrs. Fernandez, on my way here, I witnessed an accident. An elderly lady fell on the bus and got hurt, the driver. Put her out in the rain, and my daughter and I felt we couldn't just move on. We stayed with her until the ambulance arrived and took her to the hospital." Marcia stopped writing and looked up from her clipboard. "You lost time to help a stranger?" "We lost time, yes, but we gained a clear conscience." For a few seconds, silence filled the room. Marcia observed Helen with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Finally, the Human Resources Coordinator spoke. "Mrs. Scott, I'll be frank with you. Your experience is adequate. Your references are good, but we have other candidates with similar qualifications. What stands out to me is your attitude. It's rare to find people who choose to do what's right, even when it might harm them." Helen didn't know if this was good or bad for her chances. "I'm going to talk with my team, and I'll get back to you by the end of the week. Could you wait in the waiting room while I get some forms for you to fill out?" Helen nodded and left the room, finding Isabel flipping through a design magazine, completely fascinated by the luxurious houses on the colorful pages. "How did it go, Mom?" "I'm not sure. I think it was different from what I expected." They filled out the necessary forms and were preparing to leave when the blonde receptionist called them. "Mrs. Scott, there's a call for you on line 2. Helen was confused. No one knew she was there except Robert. Could he have found out where she would be working? She answered the phone with her heart pounding. "Helen, this is Robert, Mrs. Rose's son." "Oh, Mr. Robert, how is your mother?" "She's fine, thank God. The doctors said it was nothing serious. Some bruises, but nothing broken. She'll be under observation until tomorrow, just as a precaution." "That's good. I was worried about her." "Helen, I need to talk to you. Do you have a few minutes?" "Of course. I work in this building. In fact, my company partners with Corporate Horizon. Can I meet you at the ground floor cafe in 5 minutes?" Helen looked at Isabel, who had realized something interesting was happening. "Of course, Mr. Robert. We'll come down." At the ground floor cafe, Robert was already waiting for them at a discreet table in the corner. He had taken off his jacket and loosened his tie, looking more human, less corporate. When he saw Helen and Isabel approaching, he stood up immediately. "Please, have a seat. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Juice?" "An orange juice for my daughter, if you could. For me, coffee is fine." Robert placed the order and turned to them with a serious but warm expression. "Helen, I've spent the whole morning thinking about what happened. My mother can't stop talking about you two. She said you took care of her as if you were family. We just did what anyone should do. But that's the point. Anyone should, but they don't. Myself, how many times have I passed by similar situations and pretended not to see? How many times have I chosen my convenience over helping someone?" Robert took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "My company is called Invest Future. We work with social investment and corporate responsibility. Ironic, isn't it? I spend my days creating projects to help communities, but today it was 2 people from a community who taught me what it really means to help." Helen didn't know where he was going with this conversation. "What I'm trying to say is that you made me rethink a lot of things, and I'd like to repay you in some way." "Mr. Robert, I already told you that. Please, let me finish. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about opportunity." Robert leaned forward, his eyes shining with an idea that was clearly exciting him. "I know the team at Corporate Horizon well. In fact, I personally know the Director of Human Resources, Fernando Almeida. It would be very easy for me to call him and ensure you got this position." Helen felt a mix of hope and discomfort. "But I'm not going to do that," Robert continued. "Do you know why? Because it would be unfair to you and the other candidates. You deserve to get this job on your own merits, not through influence." Isabel, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. "Then why are you telling us this?" Robert smiled at the girl. "Because I want your mother to know that, regardless of the outcome of this interview, there are other opportunities. My company is always looking for people with integrity, people who do the right thing even when it's hard. Helen, I would like to offer you a position at Invest Future, not as a cleaner but as an administrative assistant. It's a role that requires organization, attention to detail, the ability to work under pressure, all the qualities you demonstrated this morning." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Helen looked at Robert, then at Isabel, trying to process what she had just heard. "Mr. Robert, I don't have office experience. I don't really know how to use a computer. All of that can be learned. What can't be taught is character, and you already have that in abundance." Helen felt her eyes well up with tears. It was too surreal. A few hours ago, she was worried about getting a cleaning job to support her daughter, and now a successful businessman was offering an opportunity she had never dreamed of. "Why are you doing this?" Helen asked, her voice choked. "Because my mother raised me alone too. Because I know what it's like to wake up in the middle of the night, worried if you'll have work the next day. And mainly because today, you reminded me of who I was before I became so professional." Robert took a business card from his pocket and handed it to Helen. "Think about it carefully, okay? You don't have to give me an answer now, but know that the offer is genuine, and I would be honored to work with someone like you." Helen took the card with trembling hands. "Robert Almeida, Director of Social Projects, Invest Future." The card was thick, elegant, with golden letters that shone under the cafe's light. At that moment, Helen's cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Mrs. Scott? This is Marcia Fernandez from Corporate Horizon." Helen gestured to Robert and Isabel, indicating it was about the interview. "Hello, Mrs. Fernandez." "Mrs. Scott, I just had a meeting with my team. We would like to offer you the position. Can you start on Monday?" Helen looked at Robert, who smiled and gave an encouraging gesture. She looked at Isabel, who clapped silently. Suddenly, in less than 24 hours, she had 2 job offers. "Mrs. Fernandez, thank you so much for the opportunity. Can I give you an answer tomorrow? I need to sort out some personal matters." "Of course, no problem. Contact me by 5 p.m. tomorrow." When Helen hung up the phone, Robert was smiling, broadly. "Congratulations, you got it." "I got 2 offers, actually," Helen said, still trying to believe her own luck. "And which one will you choose?" Helen looked at Robert's business card, then at the building where she had just been approved to work as a cleaner. 2 opportunities, 2 completely different futures opening up before her. "I don't know. I need to think." "Of course you do. And you know what else? Regardless of your choice, you're going to do well. Because people like you, people who stop to help a stranger in the rain, always find a way to prosper." Robert stood up, preparing to leave. "My mother asked me to give you a message. She said you are angels in disguise, and she hopes to see you soon for a proper lunch." Isabel laughed. "We'd love to see Mrs. Rose again. I'm sure she'll be very happy to hear that." After Robert left, Helen and Isabel remained seated in the cafe, watching the movement of people around them. Rushed executives, elegant secretaries, nervous young interns. All those people had their own dreams, their own struggles, their own moments of decision. "Mom, what are you going to choose?" Isabel asked. Helen looked at her daughter, at this 8-year-old girl who had shown more wisdom and compassion in one morning than many adults show in a lifetime. "I don't know yet, my daughter, but I know we'll decide together, as we always do." They left the building hand in hand, walking down Michigan Avenue under a sun that had finally overcome the morning clouds. Ahead of them lay a future full of possibilities, a direct consequence of a simple choice made a few hours earlier. The choice to be kind when it would have been easier to be indifferent. Rain had passed, leaving the air cleaner and the city more beautiful. And Helen Scott, cleaner, mother, a good woman, walked towards a future that promised to be much better than anything she could have imagined when she woke up in the pre-dawn hours. The evening arrived with a serenity that contrasted with the turmoil Helen felt inside. Sitting at the small kitchen table, she watched Isabel do her homework under the light of the fluorescent bulb that flickered occasionally. The girl was focused on an essay about my favorite hero, and Helen couldn't help but smile at the dedication with which her daughter wrote each word. On the right side of the table was Robert Almeida's business card, its golden letters seeming to shine even in the dim light. On the left, a piece of paper with the phone number of Marcia Fernandez from Corporate Horizon. Two opportunities, two completely different futures waiting for a decision. Helen had spent the afternoon talking to Mrs. Carmen, the neighbor who had arranged the interview recommendation. The older woman had listened to the whole story with wide eyes, shaking her head in disbelief at every twist. "Girl, you saved a life and got 2 job offers in the same day. If that's not God's work, I don't know what is," Mrs. Carmen had said, sipping the coffee Helen had offered. But now, alone with her thoughts and responsibilities, Helen knew the decision was not as simple as it seemed. The job at Corporate Horizon was safe, familiar within her comfort zone. $1,200 a month, a formal contract, a better life, but without major risks. Robert's proposal, on the other hand, was tempting, frightening, and full of uncertainty. An administrative assistant in a social investment firm. She didn't even really know what that meant. How could she work with spreadsheets, meetings, reports, when she barely knew how to use a computer? "Mum, can I ask a question?" Isabel said, looking up from her notebook. "Of course, my love. Why are you so worried? Today was a good day, wasn't it?" Helen smiled at the simplicity of the question. To Isabel, helping Mrs. Rose, meeting Robert, getting 2 job offers, all of it was naturally good. There was no anxiety about the future, only gratitude for the present. "I'm worried because I have to choose between 2 very different things, and I'm afraid of making the wrong choice." Isabel put down her pencil and came closer to her mother. "Remember when you taught me what to do when I don't know the answer to a question on a test?" "I remember. You stop, take a deep breath, and ask yourself which answer makes your heart feel more at peace." "Exactly. So which one makes your heart feel more at peace?" Helen closed her eyes for a moment. When she thought of Corporate Horizon, she felt security, but also a strange sense of limiting herself. When she thought of Invest Future, she felt fear, but also an excitement she hadn't experienced in years. "I think I know the answer," Helen murmured. The next morning, Helen woke with a determination she hadn't felt in a long time. She had made her decision during the night, lying in the narrow bed, listening to Isabel's peaceful breathing beside her. It was a choice that scared her, but one that also excited her in a way she couldn't fully explain. First, she called Marcia Fernandez. "Mrs. Fernandez, this is Helen Scott. About the position at Corporate Horizon, I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity, but I won't be able to accept. A family situation has come up that requires a change of plans." Marcia sounded surprised on the other end of the line. "Are you sure, Mrs. Scott? It's a good opportunity." "I'm sure. And thank you again for the consideration." Next, she picked up Robert's card and dialed the number with slightly trembling hands. "Robert Almeida. Mr. Robert, this is Helen Scott." "Helen, how are you? Have you made your decision?" "I have. If the offer still stands, I would very much like to accept the job at Invest Future." The silence on the other end lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity to Helen. "Of course the offer still stands. I'm very happy, Helen. When can you start?" "Whenever is best for you." "How about Monday? I can send a car to pick you and Isabel up. I'd like you to see the office and meet the team before you officially start." Helen accepted, thanked him, and when she hung up the phone, she realized she was crying, not from sadness, but from a mixture of fear, hope, and gratitude that moved her deeply. Isabel, who had woken up during the calls, ran to hug her mother. "Are we going to work at Mr. Roberts' company?" "I'm going to work there. You're going to keep studying and being the smartest girl I know." On Saturday, Helen used her last savings to buy a suitable outfit for the new job. It was nothing too expensive. A pair of black dress pants, 2 simple but elegant blouses, and a pair of closed-toe shoes that weren't genuine leather but passed for it. In the store's mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked professional, On Monday morning at 8 o'clock sharp, a black car pulled up in front of the building where Helen lived. The driver, a friendly man in his 50s, greeted them politely and drove them through traffic that Helen had never seen from that angle, from the comfort of a car with air conditioning and leather seats. The Invest Future office occupied 2 floors of a modern building in Wicker Park. It was completely different from the cold corporate environment of Horizon. Here the walls were colourful, there were plants scattered throughout the hallways, and the rooms had inspiring names: Hope Room, Transformation Room, Better Future Room. Robert greeted them personally at the elevator, wearing a light blue shirt without a tie and a genuine smile that put Helen at ease. "Welcome to our second home," he said, guiding them through the reception. "Helen, I want you to meet some very special people." The first person he introduced was Carla Mendez, a woman in her early 40s with short hair and an air of kind efficiency. "Carla is our project coordinator and will be your direct supervisor. She's one of the most competent people I know, and also one of the most patient." Carla shook Helen's hand warmly. "A pleasure to meet you, Helen. Robert told me your story and I'm very excited to work together." Next she met Marcus, a young man in his mid-20s, responsible for the company's technology. He was the one who offered to teach Helen how to use the computer systems. "Don't worry," Marcus said with an encouraging smile. "I can teach anyone to use any program. It just takes patience and a willingness to learn." Helen was also introduced to Anna Paula, the company's psychologist, who took care of the well-being of employees and project beneficiaries, to John, an accountant who explained spreadsheets with impressive clarity, and to Fernanda, a journalism intern who was responsible for the company's communications. Every person she met treated her with genuine respect, without condescension, as if her life experience was as valuable as any university degree. It was an environment Helen had never imagined could exist. The first week was intense. Helen learned about Invest Future's projects, scholarships for low-income youth, professional training programs in underserved communities, support for micro-entrepreneurs, and social infrastructure projects. It was a company that truly changed lives, and Helen felt proud to be a part of it. Marcus kept his promise and, with infinite patience, taught Helen how to use the computer, the file system, basic spreadsheets, email, and the internet. Helen discovered that learning was like riding a bicycle. Once you got the hang of it, it became natural. Carla taught her about organizing documents, scheduling meetings, professional telephone etiquette, and the art of keeping everything running smoothly. Helen discovered that the skills she had developed over years of taking care of her home, organizing Isabel's life, and managing multiple cleaning jobs were perfectly transferable to the corporate environment. Isabel, for her part, was fascinated by the changes in their lives. The girl came to the office after school a few times a week, doing her homework in a small room that Robert had set aside especially for her. The employees loved having the girl around, who brought a youthful and joyful energy to the environment. It was on one of those afternoons, 2 weeks after Helen started working, that Robert called her for a private conversation in his office. "Helen, how are you feeling here?" "Very well, Mr. Robert. Better than I ever imagined possible." "That's good, and you know you don't have to call me Mr., right? We're colleagues now," Helen smiled. "It's hard to get used to. To me, sir, Eustace will always be the person who changed our lives." "Actually, you two are the ones who changed my life, and that's what I want to talk about." Robert stood up and walked to his office window, which offered a view of the city that never stopped. "Helen, do you remember what happened that rainy morning? An old lady fell on the bus and was treated like a problem by the other passengers. You were the only ones who stopped to help." "Yes, I remember. That scene won't leave my mind, and it made me think, how many people go through difficulties every day and are simply ignored? How many Mrs. Roses are out there, just needing someone to care?" Helen didn't know where he was going with this. "I had an idea for a new project, and I wanted your opinion. What if we created a specific program for vulnerable elderly people? Something that wasn't just assistance, but that truly integrated them into society, that made them feel useful and valued." Helen's heart pounded. It was a beautiful idea, but... "It's a wonderful idea, Robert. But I wouldn't know how. To help with something like that, I don't have the training. Robert returned to his chair and leaned forward, looking directly at Helen. Helen, you've spent years taking care of people. You understand empathy, human needs, how to make someone feel important. Those aren't things you learn in a university. But let me finish. I know you don't have formal experience with social projects, but I have a proposal. What if you took a course in social project management? The company would pay for it. It would be on weekends so as not to interfere with work. And when you finished, you could coordinate this new program. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of traffic below. Helen tried to process what she had just heard. You're offering for me to study and then coordinate a project? I'm offering you an opportunity to grow professionally, to use all that life experience in a way that can impact hundreds of people. Helen felt her eyes fill with tears. At 32, after years of believing her life would always be the same, someone was offering her the chance to study, to grow, to make a difference in the world. Why are you doing this? Robert smiled. Because I believe the right people come into our lives at the right time, and because my mother won't stop saying that you and Isabel were angels sent by God that day. And speaking of my mother, she's much better, fully recovered from the fall, and she's been insisting that you come have dinner with us on Saturday. Helen laughed through her tears. We'd love to. Great. Then it's settled. Do you accept to take the course? Helen thought of Isabel, who dreamed of studying medicine to help people. She thought of all the times she had told her daughter that studying was important, that knowledge was the only thing no one could take from them. How could she not accept such an opportunity? Yes, I accept, and thank you so much. That night, Helen told Isabel everything during dinner. The girl was so excited she let her food get cold on her plate. Mom, does this mean you're going to be a student like me? Yes, I am. We'll both be studying together. And you're going to help people like Mrs. Rose? I'm going to help a lot of people like Mrs. Rose. Isabel got up from her chair and hugged Helen tightly. I always knew you were special, Mom. Now the whole world will know too. On Saturday, Helen and Isabel dressed in their best clothes for dinner at Robert and Mrs. Rose's house. They took 2 buses and walked a few blocks until they reached an elegant apartment in Lincoln Park. Mrs. Rose greeted them at the door, completely recovered and radiant with happiness. She wore a light blue dress and had set the table as if they were royalty. My dears, come here, let me give my saviors a hug. The apartment was cozy, full of family photos and books scattered everywhere. Helen discovered that Mrs. Rose had indeed been a teacher for 40 years, that she had taught hundreds of children to read and write, and that her passion for education was contagious. During dinner, Mrs. Rose insisted on hearing all the details about Helen's new job, about her plans to study, about the projects at Invest Future. And when Helen talked about the idea for the program for the elderly, the lady's eyes lit up. You know, Helen, I always thought that after I retired, my useful life was over. But talking to you, I'm starting to think that maybe I can still contribute something. Robert got excited. Mom, what if you participated in the development of this project? Your experience in education would be fundamental. Mrs. Rose blushed like a teenager. Are you serious? Of course, Helen said. You have so much knowledge, so much life experience. It would be an honor to work with you. And so, on a Saturday night, during a dinner among friends who had met in a moment of difficulty, the Active Wisdom Project was officially born, a program that would connect retired seniors with at-risk youth, creating an exchange of experiences that would benefit both generations. Helen left that dinner with the certainty that her life had changed definitively. It wasn't just the new job, the better salary, the opportunity to study. It was the feeling that she had finally found her place in the world, her purpose, her way of making a difference. As they walked to the bus stop, Isabel held her mother's hand and said, Mom, do you remember when you always told me that bad things pass but good people stay forever? Yes, I remember. I think I finally understand what that means. The rain from that day passed, but Mrs. Rose, Robert, and all the good things that happened because of that day will stay forever. Helen stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and hugged her daughter. Isabel was right, as she almost always was. The storms of life pass, but the choices we make during them, the people we decide to help, the bonds we create. Those things remain and multiply in ways we can never predict. The bus arrived, and for the first time in many years, Helen didn't worry about the fare, didn't mentally calculate how much she still had in her wallet, didn't fret over the tight monthly budget, not because she had become rich, but because she had finally found something more valuable than money, the certainty that she was on the right path, surrounded by the right people, doing the right thing. 6 months had passed since that rainy morning that changed everything. Helen looked out the window of her new office at Invest Future. Yes, she had her own office now, observing the city she knew so well but now saw with different eyes. Chicago was still a challenging metropolis, but for Helen, it had also become a city full of possibilities. The Active Wisdom Project had grown beyond all expectations. What began as a simple idea during a dinner had transformed into a structured program serving 15 different communities. Mrs. Rose, who was initially just a consultant, had become the project's pedagogical coordinator, bringing her 4 decades of experience in education to create methodologies that truly worked. On that particular morning, Helen was reviewing the latest reports when Marcus appeared at her office door, a strange expression on his face. "Helen, do you have a minute? I need to show you something." "Of course, Marcus, what is it?" Marcus was carrying his laptop and seemed both excited and concerned. "Remember that day at the hospital when you helped Mrs. Rose? Did you know someone filmed part of the scene?" Helen frowned. "Filmed? Who?" "Apparently a nurse who was leaving his shift. He posted the video on social media a few weeks ago, but it didn't go viral until now." Marcus opened the laptop and showed Helen the screen. It was a video of just over a minute, filmed from a distance, showing Helen and Isabel taking care of Mrs. Rose under the awning. The quality wasn't professional, but you could clearly see Isabel taking off her coat to cover the lady, Helen holding her hand, the two of them staying by the elderly woman's side, even in the rain. The video's caption read, "In times of so much indifference, an 8-year-old girl and her mother teach us about humanity. They missed important appointments to care for a stranger who had fallen off the bus. The world needs more people like this." Helen sat down heavily in her chair. The video already had over 200,000 views and thousands of comments. "How did you find this?" Helen asked, still processing the information. "One of the girls on our communications team saw it on social media and showed me. Helen, this is spreading very fast. Even newspapers are sharing it." Helen read some of the comments. Most were positive, people sharing their own stories of kindness, praising Isabel, saying the video had restored their faith in humanity. But there were also skeptical comments, people questioning if the scene was real, speculating about ulterior motives. "I don't know how I feel about this," Helen said honestly. "We just did what was right." And that's exactly why the video is touching so many people. In a world where everything seems staged for social media, you acted genuinely, without knowing you were being filmed. Robert appeared at the door at that moment, knocking lightly before entering. "Helen, have you seen the video?" "I just found out. Is this good or bad for the company?" Robert sat in one of the chairs in front of Helen's desk. "For the company it could be very good, but my concern is for you and Isabel. This kind of exposure can have consequences that aren't always positive." "What do you mean?" "Well, journalists will want to interview you. People will want to know the full story. There might be requests to appear on television shows. You need to be prepared for that." Helen felt a knot in her stomach. The idea of appearing on television, of being interviewed by journalists, terrified her. "I don't want to do that, Robert. We didn't help Mrs. Rose to be in the media. And it's precisely that attitude that makes people identify with you. But you need to understand that whether you like it or not, this will generate interest. The important thing is that you have control over how your story is told." Marcus closed the laptop and stood up. "Helen, what if I created an official profile for the Active Wisdom Project? That way, if people want to know more about the story, they'll find out about the work you're doing. We can turn the attention into something productive." The idea made sense to Helen. If her story was going to go viral anyway, at least it could be used to promote the project and help more people. "Okay, but I want full control over what's posted." "Of course. And I suggest we talk to a PR agency. If interview requests start coming in, it's better to have a professional to filter them. That afternoon, Helen went to pick up Isabel from school as she always did. The girl, now 9, had grown a lot in recent months, not just physically but in maturity and confidence. The environment at Invest Future, where she spent some afternoons, had broadened her horizons impressively. "Mom, my teacher said you've become famous," Isabel said as they walked home. "Not famous, my love, just that some people saw a video about that day we helped Mrs. Rose." "Can you show me the video?" Helen hesitated, but decided Isabel had the right to know. When they got home, she showed her daughter the video on her new phone, one of the first luxuries she had allowed herself with her better salary. Isabel watched in concentrated silence. When the video ended, she looked at Helen with a serious expression. "Are people saying good things?" "Most of them are. They're saying you were very brave and kind. But I just did what you taught me. When someone needs help, we help." Helen hugged her daughter. "And you did it perfectly. I'm very proud of you." "Is this going to change anything in our lives?" "It might, my daughter. Maybe some people will want to talk to us about that day. But the most important part of our lives, you, me, our work, our friends, that won't change." In the following days, Robert's predictions came true. The phone at Invest Future rang non-stop with interview requests. Local newspapers, blogs, radio stations, television shows, everyone wanted to tell the story of the girl who became a symbol of kindness. Helen, following Robert's advice, hired a small PR agency and decided to accept only a few selected interviews, always focusing on the Active Wisdom Project and the work of Invest Future. The first interview was for a local newspaper. The journalist, a friendly young woman named Patricia, met Helen and Isabel at a cafe near the office. Helen was nervous, but Isabel seemed perfectly at ease. "Helen, how does it feel to be called a hero?" Patricia asked. "I don't feel like a hero. Heroes do extraordinary things. We just did what anyone should do." "But that's the point, isn't it? Not everyone would do what you did." Helen thought for a moment. "Maybe. That's true. But I think that says more about our society than about us. If a simple act of kindness is considered extraordinary, it's because we've lost something important along the way." "And you, Isabel?" Patricia asked, turning to the girl. "How did you feel that day?" "I felt sad seeing Mrs. Rose hurt and alone, but I felt happy when we were able to help her. My mom always says that when we help someone, we're actually helping ourselves too." The journalist seemed touched by the answer. "And now you work with social projects. Is that related to that?" "Tati." Helen nodded. "That day showed me that there are good people in the world like Robert who are willing to give opportunities to those who want to make a difference. The Active Wisdom Project was born from that encounter." "Can you tell me a little about the project?" Helen visibly brightened. It was a subject she mastered and about which she felt genuine passion. "The project connects elderly people with at-risk youth. The seniors share practical knowledge, cooking, crafts, gardening, but also life experiences, stories, values. The youth, in turn, teach technology, help with physical activities, bring new energy. It's an exchange that benefits everyone." "How many people has the project served so far?" "Over 300 families directly, but the indirect impact is much greater. Every person who goes through the project takes the lessons back to their communities." The article was published in a Sunday edition and generated even more interest. Helen realized that people weren't just interested in the story of the video, but genuinely curious about the social work she was doing. It was then that something unexpected happened. A producer from a national television show contacted her, inviting Helen to participate in a special on Americans Who Make a Difference. The show would be recorded live, and Helen would have 5 minutes to present the Active Wisdom Project. Helen wanted to refuse, but Robert convinced her that it would be a unique opportunity to promote the project nationally and potentially attract more sponsors and volunteers. The recording was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Helen was more nervous than she had been for any job interview. She wore a blazer she had bought especially for the occasion, navy blue, elegant but not ostentatious, and had rehearsed her presentation dozens of times. Isabel couldn't attend because it was a late-night show, but the entire Invest Future team gathered at the office to watch. Robert organized a small party, with popcorn and soda, turning the moment into a celebration. When Helen appeared on the screen, everyone applauded. She looked confident, professional, but maintained the authenticity that had won people over in the original video. The host, a charismatic middle-aged man, gave a brief introduction about the viral story before introducing Helen. Helen Scott, the woman who, along with her 8-year-old daughter, became a symbol of kindness in America. Helen, what's it like to be recognized for something you consider natural? Helen took a deep breath and smiled. It's surreal, to be honest, but if our story can inspire other people to be kinder, then I'm happy it has gained this attention. You now work with social projects. Can you tell us about that? Helen visibly lit up and began to describe the Active Wisdom Project with a passion that was impossible to fake. She spoke about Mrs. Rose, who had become the pedagogical coordinator, about the results already achieved, about plans for expansion. During her speech, the production showed images of the project in action, seniors teaching children to cook, young people helping elderly women use smartphones, community gardening activities, craft workshops. Helen, what is your message for those watching now? Helen looked directly at the camera. My message is simple. We all have the ability to make a difference in someone's life. It doesn't have to be something grand. Sometimes it's just stopping to help someone who has fallen or paying attention to someone who feels invisible. Small gestures create ripples that go far beyond what we can imagine. When the program ended, the office erupted in applause. Robert hugged Helen with tears in his eyes. Helen, you were perfect. Absolutely perfect. In the days following the program, the phone at Invest Future didn't stop ringing. It wasn't just interview requests, but people wanting to volunteer, companies offering sponsorship, social organizations proposing partnerships. Marcus created a spreadsheet to organize all the opportunities. In 1 week, the Active Wisdom Project received funding proposals that would allow it to expand to 50 communities. But the most touching impact came from unexpected sources. Handwritten letters arrived daily from people who had seen the program and were inspired to do something similar in their cities. An 80-year-old woman from New Orleans wrote to say she had started teaching neighborhood children to knit. A retiree from Denver set up a woodworking shop for at-risk youth. Helen realized something much bigger was happening. It was no longer just about the Active Wisdom Project or Invest Future. It was a movement of kindness spreading across the country, inspired by a moment of humanity on a rainy morning. It was on a Friday, 3 weeks after the television program, that Helen received a phone call that left her completely speechless. Hello, Helen. This is Maria Fernanda from the White House press office. The President would like to invite you to a ceremony recognizing Americans who have distinguished themselves in the social field. It would be next Monday at the White House. Helen had to sit down. The President? Her? There must be a mistake. I'm not... It's no mistake, Helen. The President watched your program and was very impressed with the work you're doing. It's a small, informal event, just for a few people who are making a difference in the country. When Helen hung up the phone, she still couldn't believe it. From an unemployed cleaner to a guest of the President in less than a year. It was too surreal to be true. She immediately called Robert, who was as excited as she was. Helen, you deserve this and so much more. Accept the invitation. But I don't even know how to behave in a situation like that. You behave exactly as you always have by being yourself. That's what got us here. That night, Helen told Isabel everything. The girl was silent for a few seconds, processing the information. Mom, does this mean you're going to meet the President? Yes, it does. Wow, can I come too? Helen laughed. I think this invitation is just for me, my daughter. That's okay, but you have to tell me everything when you get back, okay? Helen hugged Isabel. I will. Every detail. As she prepared for bed, Helen looked out the window of the apartment she now called home. It was no longer the 2-room place in Hope Creek, but a larger, more comfortable place in the same neighborhood, because Helen didn't want to move away from the people who had welcomed her in difficult times. The city outside remained the same, but for Helen, everything had changed. Not just her external circumstances, but her way of seeing the world and her place in it. A year ago, she saw herself only as a cleaner struggling to survive. Now she saw herself as someone capable of transforming lives, inspiring change, and being the protagonist of her own story. But what moved her most wasn't the personal recognition. It was knowing that that moment of kindness on a rainy morning had multiplied into hundreds of other moments of kindness spread across the country. It was knowing that Mrs. Rose, at 70, had discovered a new way to be useful. It was knowing that Robert had rediscovered the purpose behind his work. And above all, it was knowing that Isabel was growing up in a world where she had learned that doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it seems costly at the moment. Tomorrow would be Monday, and Helen Scott, former cleaner, single mother, social projects coordinator, would go to the White House to be honored by the president. But before all that, she was still the same person who stopped to help a stranger on a rainy morning because it was simply the right thing to do. Monday dawned with a clear blue sky in Washington, D.C., contrasting with the whirlwind of emotions Helen felt as the plane prepared to land. It was her first time flying, her first time leaving Chicago, and certainly her first time visiting the center of the country's political power. Robert had insisted on accompanying her, as had Mrs. Rose, who wouldn't miss the chance to see her daughter of the heart being honored by the president for anything in the world. Isabel had stayed in Chicago with Carla, but not before making Helen promise to take lots of pictures and ask the president if he knew any female presidents to inspire her. In the taxi from the airport to the hotel, Helen observed the unique architecture of D.C., with its futuristic-looking buildings and immense spaces that contrasted with the crowded Chicago she knew. Everything there seemed designed to impress, to remind people of the country's greatness. Mrs. Rose held her hand, sensing the nervousness Helen was trying to hide. "My dear, you've already done the hardest part. Now, you just have to receive the recognition you deserve." "But what if I say the wrong thing? What if I don't know how to act?" Robert, sitting in the front seat, turned to look at her. "Helen, you spoke on national television and moved millions of people. You spoke with journalists, coordinated meetings, created a project that's changing lives across the country. Why would today be any different?" "Because today is with the president, Robert. He's the most powerful man in the country. And you are Helen Scott, the woman who stopped to help a stranger in the rain and turned it into a revolution of kindness. That's much more powerful than any political office." The ceremony was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. Helen had brought her best dress, a simple but elegant navy blue model she had bought especially for the occasion. Mrs. Rose helped her get ready at the hotel, combing her hair with the care of a true mother. When they arrived at the White House, Helen had to lean on Robert's arm to keep from stumbling. The building was even more imposing in person than in the photos she'd seen in the news. Uniformed guards, immaculate gardens, an aura of power and history that was intimidating. At the reception, they were greeted by a young and efficient aide who guided them through hallways filled with works of art and furniture that seemed to be worth more than everything Helen had ever owned. The ceremony was to be held in the East Room, a large and elegantly decorated space where 8 other people were waiting, all Americans who had distinguished themselves in different social areas. There was a doctor who had created a program for free surgeries in rural areas, a teacher who developed an innovative literacy method, a farmer who implemented sustainable techniques in rural communities. Helen felt honored to be in the company of such dedicated people, but also questioned internally if she deserved to be there. All the others had university degrees, years of experience, projects structured for decades. She was just a former cleaner who had done the obvious. It was then that she met Maria Santos, a black woman of about 60, who was being honored for her work with street children in New York City. "You're Helen from the video, aren't you?" Maria asked with a warm smile. "Yes, I am." "Girl, you have no idea the impact your story had. After I saw your program on television, I managed to triple the number of volunteers for my project. People started to believe again that it's possible to make a difference." "Really? Really? Sometimes we need simple examples to remember that kindness still exists. You and your daughter were that example." The conversation was interrupted when the doors to the room opened and the president entered, accompanied by a few aides. He was a middle-aged man, shorter than Helen had imagined, but with a warm smile that immediately eased her tension. "Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to have you here today." The president walked around the room, greeting each honoree individually, briefly talking about their projects. When it was Helen's turn, she felt her legs go weak. "Helen Scott, the woman who showed us that humanity still exists. It's a pleasure to meet you in person." "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. President. I watched your program and was genuinely moved, not just by your story, but by the way you transformed a moment of solidarity into something much bigger." Helen thanked him, not knowing exactly what to say. "Tell me about your daughter. Isabel, isn't it?" "Yes, it is. She couldn't come today, but she asked me to ask you if you know any female presidents for her to look up to." The president laughed out loud, a genuine laugh that echoed through the room. "What a smart girl. Tell her I know several female presidents around the world, and they all started exactly like her, believing they could make a difference." The official ceremony began a few minutes later. Each honoree was called up individually to receive a medal and a certificate of recognition. When it was Helen's turn, her legs almost gave out, but the president's voice sounded clear and warm. "Helen Scott, for demonstrating that small acts of kindness can transform lives and inspire an entire nation. For the courage to stop and help when it would have been easier to keep going, and for transforming your personal experience into a project that benefits hundreds of American families." When the president placed the medal around her neck, Helen had to fight back tears. Not because of the ceremony's pomp or the official recognition, but because she thought of everything that had happened since that rainy morning. Of Isabel, who was in Chicago, probably doing her homework and dreaming of being president. Of Mrs. Rose, who had discovered a new way to be useful at 70. Of Robert, who had rediscovered the purpose of his work. Of all the people the Active Wisdom Project had already touched. After the official ceremony, there was a reception where the honorees could talk more freely with the president and other guests. Helen found herself engaged in conversations about public policy, social investment, project scalability, topics she wouldn't have dreamed of understanding a year ago. It was during the reception that the president called her for a private conversation in a more secluded corner of the room. "Helen, I want to make you a proposal." Helen's heart pounded. "The Department of Health and Human Services is creating a national program for intergenerational integration, based in part on the model you developed with Active Wisdom. We would like to invite you to be a consultant for the project." Helen was speechless. The president of the country was offering her a chance to influence national public policy. "But Mr. President, I don't have the technical training for something like that." "Helen, you have something much more valuable than technical training. You have real experience. You understand people's needs because you have lived those needs. Theory is important, but without practice, without the knowledge of those on the front lines, it's empty." The president paused, observing Helen's surprised expression. "Obviously, you wouldn't be alone. You would have a team of experts, adequate resources, time to get trained. But your voice, your perspective, would be crucial to ensure the program truly works for those who need it most." Helen looked through the palace windows, seeing D.C. stretch out in the distance. She thought of Chicago, of her small home, of Isabel waiting for her. "Can I think about it?" "Of course, take all the time you need, but know that it would be an honor to have you with us." The flight back to Chicago was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Robert leafed through some documents, Mrs. Rose dozed gently, and Helen watched the clouds from the plane window, trying to process everything that had happened. When they finally arrived home, it was already night. Isabel was waiting for them with Carla, anxious to hear every detail of the trip. "Mom, how was it? Did you meet the president? Is he nice? Do you have pictures?" Helen laughed at the avalanche of questions and sat on the sofa, pulling Isabel onto her lap. "Calm down, my daughter. I'll tell you everything, but first, he sent a special message for you." "For me?" "For you. He said he knows several female presidents around the world, and they all started by believing they could make a difference, just like you." Isabel was silent for a few seconds, absorbing the information. "Did he really say that?" "He did. And you know what else? He offered me a job helping the government create projects like ours for the whole country." Isabel's eyes widened. "That's amazing, Mom. Are you going to accept?" I'm still thinking it's a very big responsibility. Isabel got off Helen's lap and stood in front of her, with that seriousness that sometimes made her seem much older than her 9 years. Mom, do you remember what you always tell me? That when we have the chance to do something good, we do it, even if it's scary. Helen smiled. Yes, I remember. Then you already know the right answer. In the days that followed, Helen had long conversations with Robert, with Mrs. Rose, with the entire Invest Future team. Everyone supported her, everyone believed she was ready for this bigger challenge. It was Mrs. Rose who said the words that finally convinced her. My dear, 9 months ago you were an unemployed cleaner. Today you are a consultant to the president. If that's not proof that you can overcome any challenge, I don't know what is. Helen accepted the proposal. She wouldn't completely leave Invest Future. She would continue as a consultant for Active Wisdom, but she would dedicate 3 days a week to the national project. 6 months later, Helen was in her office in D.C., reviewing the initial results of the National Intergenerational Integration Program. The pilot project had been implemented in 100 American cities, directly benefiting over 10,000 people. But the numbers, as impressive as they were not what moved Helen the most. It was knowing that that rainy morning in Chicago had turned into a wave of transformation that now reached the entire country. It was receiving letters from seniors who had rediscovered their value, from young people who had found mentors, from families that had been strengthened through intergenerational exchange. On that particular day, Helen had received a special invitation. A high school in Miami wanted her to speak to students about youth leadership and social transformation. It was the kind of invitation she received frequently now. But this one was different. The school was called Isabel Scott High School. When Helen saw the name, she had to sit down. She immediately called the school principal. Mrs. Scott, this is Mariana Oliveira, the principal. It's an honor to speak with you. The pleasure is mine, Principal Oliveira. But I have to ask, why is the school named after my daughter? Actually, it's a tribute not just to your daughter, but to what she represents. When we opened the school 3 months ago, we wanted a name that symbolized hope, kindness, the ability of children to transform the world. The name Isabel Scott represents all of that. Helen was too moved to respond immediately. Will you accept our invitation? We would love for you to bring Isabel along. Of course I accept, and I'm sure Isabel will be thrilled. When Helen told Isabel, now 10, about the school named after her, the girl was silent for a long time. Mum, does this mean our story really changed things? It did, my daughter, more than we ever imagined. A week later, Helen and Isabel were on the stage of the Isabel Scott High School auditorium, looking at an audience of 300 attentive teenagers. It was a model public school, built with funds from companies that had been inspired by the Active Wisdom project to invest in education. Helen began by telling the story of that rainy morning 2 years ago. She talked about the choice to help Mrs. Rose, about the opportunities that arose, about how a simple decision had transformed into a cascade of positive changes. But it was Isabel who truly captured the audience. At just 10 years old, she spoke with impressive maturity about the importance of not ignoring those in need, about how small gestures can lead to great transformations. You know, Isabel said to the audience, when my mom and I helped Mrs. Rose, we weren't thinking about becoming famous or changing the world. We were just being ourselves. And we discovered that being who you are when you're a good person can create miracles. The presentation was followed by a question and answer session that extended far beyond the scheduled time. The young people wanted to know how they could start their own projects, how to overcome obstacles, how not to give up when things get tough. A 15-year-old girl raised her hand and asked, Helen, what's your advice for someone who wants to make a difference but doesn't know where to start? Helen looked at the girl, who reminded her of herself a few years ago, full of dreams but unsure how to achieve them. My advice is simple. Start by paying attention to the people around you. There's always someone who needs help, a smile, attention. Start there. Do what you can, where you are, with what you have. The rest will come naturally. A boy in the back of the auditorium asked, Isabel, do You want to be a politician when you grow up? Isabel smiled. I want to help people. If it's through politics, great. If it's through medicine, education, or any other way, that's great too. The important thing isn't how you help, it's that you help. When the presentation ended, Helen and Isabel were surrounded by dozens of students wanting to talk more, take pictures, ask for autographs. It was surreal for Helen to see that her story had inspired a new generation of young people committed to social transformation. On the plane back to Chicago, Isabel rested her head on Helen's shoulder. Mom, do you think we really made a difference? Helen looked out the window, seeing the city lights spread out below like stars on Earth. She thought of the national project that now served thousands of people, of the hundreds of local initiatives born from inspiration from her story, of the young people she had just met in Miami who were determined to create their own projects for change. I think so, my daughter. I think we made a bigger difference than we ever dreamed. But you know what's most important? Helen continued, kissing the top of Isabel's head. It's that none of this would have happened if we hadn't done the first right thing on that rainy morning. Everything else came from that. 3 years had passed since that rainy morning that changed everything. Helen was now based in Washington, D.C. during the week, but always returned to Chicago on weekends to be with Isabel, who continued to study at the same public school by her own choice. The National Intergenerational Integration Program was implemented in over 1,000 American cities and had become a model for other countries in Latin America. Mrs. Rose, now 74, traveled the country as a trainer of trainers, teaching other seniors to become mentors for young people. Robert expanded Invest Future and now directed a network of social organizations operating throughout the country. But he continued to remind everyone he met that the transformation had begun with 2 people simply doing the right thing. On a sunny Saturday, Helen was at home with Isabel, now 13, helping her with a school project on citizenship and social transformation. It was ironic that her daughter was studying concepts they had lived in practice. Mum, can I ask a question? Isabel said, looking up from the computer. Of course. Do you regret anything that happened? Missing that first interview, leaving our simple life behind? Helen stopped folding the clothes she was organizing and looked at her daughter. It was a profound question that deserved an honest answer. I don't regret anything, Isabel. That morning taught me that the best things in life happen when we choose to do good, even when it's inconvenient. Our life isn't simple anymore, it's true, but it's a life with purpose. And you? If you could go back, would you do anything differently? Isabel reflected for a few moments. I would do exactly the same thing, because I discovered that helping people makes me happier than anything else. That night, Helen was on the porch of her house, watching the stars and reflecting on the extraordinary journey her life had become. Her cell phone rang. It was Robert calling from Chicago. Helen, did you see the news today? No, why? The video from that rainy morning reached 1 million views today. And you know what's most incredible? The most recent comments aren't just praise for you. They're people telling their own stories of kindness, projects they created inspired by you, lives that changed after watching the video. Helen smiled in the dark. It's amazing how things spread, isn't it? It's more than that, Helen. It's proof that good is contagious, that one right choice can create infinite ripples of more right choices. After she hung up, Helen stayed on the porch for a few more minutes, thinking about everything Robert had said. 1 million people had watched that moment of her life. How many other Mrs. Roses had been helped because of that example? How many other social projects had been born inspired by that story? It was impossible to doubt, and maybe that was the point. The consequences of kindness are infinite and unpredictable, like ripples that spread far beyond what we can see or imagine. Isabel appeared on the porch, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. What are you thinking so hard about, Mom? I'm thinking that life is an extraordinary thing, my daughter, that sometimes a rainy morning can change the destiny of thousands of people. And that it all started because we decided to be kind when it would have been easier not to be. Exactly. They stood there, mother and daughter, drinking hot chocolate and watching the city sleep below. Chicago was still a challenging metropolis, but for Helen it had also become a city full of possibilities and stories of transformation. Somewhere in that city, perhaps at that very moment, someone was making a choice. Choosing to help instead of ignore, choosing to care instead of walk by, choosing to be human instead of indifferent. And maybe, just maybe, that choice would become the first domino in a new cascade of kindness, creating ripples that would one day reach much farther than anyone could imagine. Because that's how the world changes, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time, and all because on a rainy winter morning, an 8-year-old girl and her mother decided that taking care of a stranger was more important than being on time. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helen and Isabel has deeply touched your hearts. If these words have stirred something special in your souls, if you were moved by the transformative journey of these two extraordinary women, please leave a like on this episode, subscribe to our channel, and share in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, narratives that reveal the brightest side of the human soul and remind us that small gestures can create miracles, because we believe that in such difficult times we need more than ever stories that inspire us to be better, to choose kindness, to make a difference in the world around us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with a new story that will move and transform your heart.